When love beckons to you, follow him. Though his ways are hard and steep, and when his wings enfold you, yield to him. Though the sword hidden among his pinions may wound you, and when he speaks to you, believe in him. Though his voice may shatter your dreams as the north wind lays waste the garden. For even as love crowns you, so shall he crucify you. Even as he is for your growth, so is he for your pruning. Even as he ascends to your height and caresses your tenderest branches that quiver in the sun, so shall he descend to your roots and shake them in their clinging to the earth. Like sheaves of corn he gathers you unto himself. He threshes you to make you naked. He sifts you to free you from your husks. He grinds you to whiteness. He kneads you until you are pliant. And then he assigns you to his sacred fire, that you may become sacred bread for God's sacred feast. All these things shall love do unto you, that you may know the secrets of your heart, and in that knowledge become a fragment of life's heart. But if in your fear you would seek only love's peace and love's pleasure, then it is better for you that you cover your nakedness and pass out of love's threshing floor into the seasonless world, where you shall laugh, but not all of your laughter, and weep, but not all of your tears. Love gives not but itself, and takes not but from itself. Love possesses not, nor would it be possessed, for love is sufficient unto love. When you love, you should not say, God is in my heart, but rather, I am in the heart of God. And think not you can direct the course of love, for love, if it finds you worthy, directs your course. Love has no other desire but to fulfill itself. But if you love and must needs have desires, let these be your desires: to melt and be like a running brook that sings its melody to the night, to know the pain of too much tenderness, to be wounded by your own understanding of love, and to bleed willingly and joyfully, to wake at dawn with a winged heart and give thanks for another day of loving, to rest at the noon hour and meditate love's ecstasy, to return home at eventide with gratitude, and then to sleep with a prayer for the beloved in your heart and a song of praise upon your lips.
And there you have it, my beloved truth seekers. Gossamer prose from Khalil Gibran's quintessential book, The Prophet, recited by Donald G. Carty. And thus, and with all the silent intensity of what we occultists are all about, we try and decipher a concept that just might be as hard to understand as salvation, enlightenment, satori, marifa, or gnosis, although it is essentially intertwined with all these salvific metaphysical gestalts. And that is the L word. And I don't mean the old Showtime series, but that would be a balling program.
Are you running a high fever? How could you conceive of something so idiotic?
No, I'm referring to love in all its mysteries. And we dare to take this mission on Aeon Byte, formerly known as Coffee, Cigarettes, and Gnosis, because heresy shouldn't be this much fun, and love is perhaps the greatest heresy against the God of this world and all his crafted institutions here on Earth.
A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. I have no bird, I have no bush. God has taken my bird and my bush.
Welcome with all of my heart and love to the virtual Alexandria, the cyber world where the dream states of East and West meet, on this approximately Saturday, December 27th, 2008. And of course it is broadcast through the GodAboveGod.cam.
I was going to the worst place in the world and I didn't even know it yet.
Merry Matrix and a Hylic New Year as you incarnate here with your host Abraxas, the terrible God above God as the ancients knew him, who is both Aeon and both Archon, and unleash your mercurial Icarus, your darksome Inanna in that dance of the seven veils, your prodigal Orpheus, your hopeless Roland battling the Saracens, and other heavy-hearted dream seekers that this time will not fail to reach the gates of imagination the Zohar speaks about. And then it's all wonder, my beloved true seekers. The underworlds and the skies all melt into one, and all that is left is the bliss of unity.
Once again, things that could have been brought to my attention yesterday!
But first we have to deal with the mystery of love if we're ever going to get anywhere in our lifetimes. We all have experienced love in its myriad alluring Tiamat heads. We all imperfectly thrive for it. We all believe it is one of the greatest tonics for spiritual growth, or at least a cure for the tumor of loneliness we house but few admit. Songs never cease to extol its rewards and punishments. Poets warn of its melancholic yet irresistible limbo. Preachers spit it out constantly without caring to formulate a meaning against the backdrop of our haughty creator God. And jihadist secularists scoff at it as another chemical reaction from beings that are nothing but globoids of cells.
I'm not a smart man, but I know what love is.
But no matter, we've all been baffled by the L word, and we've all been ever so briefly transformed into light-filled devas by its sultry flame, but not long enough to ever be satisfied.
You are what you love, not what loves you. That's what I decided a long time ago.
But with Loki's luck, we will find some clarity soon. I can't think of a better guest in this eternal now to remove the dead snakeskins of misconception of the mystery of love. And that is Richard Smoley, rewarding us for a third time appearance at Aeon Byte. Richard, besides being a wonderful man of acumen and truth-seeking, is the author of the new book Conscious Love, as well as Inner Christianity, a guide to the esoteric tradition, and Hidden Wisdom, a guide to the Western inner traditions. Only surprising the Irish, which is half of my mortal incarnation, we will focus on his newest book, Conscious Love. Richard leaves no crackstone unburned. He sifts through those who have reflected on love from all corners of history. Artists of all stripes, philosophers, theologians, legendary figures, psychologists, sociologists, historians, religious founders, and all manners of texts.
And I'm here on a mission of mercy.
Conscious Love is not a long book, but dense like a red dwarf when it comes to finding concrete answers to the mystery of love. After reading the book, the concept of love actually became more of an enigma for me, I must admit. Because after all, in essence, it is a mystery, and mysteries are to be experienced and not learned. In other words, it is a valuable book because it makes one think with careful prejudice, questions one's once confident stances, and makes one glance inwardly to make sure that spiritual engine might need a tune-up. I've been handling a ghostly Rubik's Cube on love after closing Conscious Love. But I accept the challenge and feel new acuity stirring in me. I'm sure if you read Conscious Love, you will have newborn revelations, but even more mystic crossword puzzles. But that is the arduous path of those who have chosen the Esoterica as their highway to hell.
Sooner or later you're going to realize, just as I did, there's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path.
For more information on Richard, please visit his website, innerchristianity.com. Between Khalil Gibran and Richard Smoley, I hope you put in a little better perspective not only love, but how you have loved, how you have failed to love, when love made you soar without ego arrogance for a while, and how love is sometimes the only lamplight in the corridors of memory, or when you walk alone in the valley of death on a rainy day with the angels laughing at you from the cliff tops.
So that's what love is, according to William Parrish?
Multiply it by infinity and take it to the depth of forever, and you will still have barely a glimpse of what I'm talking about.
So what about the Gnostics? Did they care about love, or just coldly leaving the material world behind, as many incorrectly believe? Richard touches upon them, and we've touched on the importance of both the Gnostic Cathars and Sufis on past episodes, on how they crystallized love, especially romantic love, that we still live by today.
There she is, the embodiment of love, your Venus!
Oh, now I hate her.
The programs are available at your fingertips. But what about the ancient dead Greek and Jewish heretics who philosophized as much as they went into astral flights beyond the static heavens into the Ogdoad, the court of Sophia and Sabaoth, the redeemed Archon?
Did you lose your mind all of a sudden, or was it a slow, gradual process?
Well, Gnostic literature certainly promotes the importance of love, and you can start by St. Paul and his heartening words on love and brotherly fellowship, some that we've heard too many times at bloody weddings. Other Gnostic texts speak abundantly about love, but I won't get into too many of them here because that would take more time than waiting for your luggage at the baggage claim.
I haven't got a brain!
But here are some of the more lionized ones. In the Gospel of Thomas, Logio number 25, Jesus says, "Love your brothers like your own life. Protect them like the pupil of your eye." The Gospel of Philip has this capital passage, "Faith receives, love gives. No one will be able to receive without faith. No one will be able to give without love. Because of this, in order that we may indeed receive, we believe, and in order that we may love, we give. Since if one gives without love, he has no profit from what he has given." Or how about this gem also from Phil's Gospel? Love never calls something its own. It never possesses. It never says, "This is yours," or "This is mine," but "All these are yours." Spiritual love is wine and fragrance. And lastly, the Gospel of Philip simply but wisely says, "Love is the wind through which we grow." And there are many, many more, my beloved truth seekers. Read the Exegesis of the Soul, the Gospel of Truth, or the Pearl of Great Price, to absorb how profoundly the Gnostic spirit deals with deep, compassionate love for the desolate and lost, our teachers and saviors, our families, and especially our friends and kindred spirits walking the same journey towards the treasury of light.
We say, love your brother. We don't say it, really, but...
We don't literally say it.
No, we don't say it.
We don't really literally mean it.
But the reality is that the Gnostic narratives are based on two of the greatest romances in existence, you see. Like with all Gnostic texts, there are various versions, but bear with me as I streamline them a bit. Once upon a time, before time, the All, the complete source, the ultimate reality, decided to know itself. As soon as the decision was made, a concert came forth from this limitless light, which some call Bar Below. Their amorous interaction begat characteristics, and they rejoice at all of them, because they were holy and good.
We are star stuff. We are the universe, made manifest, trying to figure itself out.
This easy symbolizes how true self-knowledge, almost with the attitude of a child, is a love affair with the parts of ourselves we forgot about in the mechanical din of the artifact that operates the universe.
Oh my God. God is love. I don't love you.
The other great romance deals with Hagia Sophia. She so much loved the ultimate reality, the great mother and father, the divine imagination, the depth and silence, that she reached out for it or perhaps tried to create something akin to it. Her actions disturbed the harmony of the divine perfect anatomy, and because of her somewhat well-meaning but self-serving love, Sophia fell, like so many of us do in our good intentions and attempts to create, project, or accept something lesser in our lives.
Everybody is stuck with the things that they're not proud of.
Yet the Pleroma would not forget or abandon her. The cosmic Christ, her consort, went down to rescue Pistis Sophia, or in other narratives to teach her once again how to recall her angelic song that would break open the clouds farted out by the Demiurge and his archons, and both were joined in a perfect and equal matrimony.
This is true love. Think this happens every day?
But the union was not complete, because during the Holy Spirit's descent, some of her light sparks became trapped in the world of forms. We are those light sparks, the world of forms, the illusion, the Maya, we are now indentured servants of.
Written with the finger of God.
And both Sophia and the cosmic Christ devise a rescue operation to remind us that we are meant to be part of their luminous union, their everlasting wedding celebration, and thus part of the biology of the symphony of the Pleroma that resounds with paragon, ineffable beauty, and sublime intracommunion. And the love story of Christ and Sophia, as well as their unconditional hostage release of us, their children, is reflected in the archetypal stories of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, Simon Magus and Helen of Troy, St. Paul and Thecla, Sabbatai Zevi and Sarah, Faustus and Gertrude, Solomon and Bathsheba, Arthur and Guinevere, Don Quixote and Dulcinea, and so many other romances that are only romances because they entail a hero and a heroine, as well as a grand, selfless mission to restore what needs to be restored: the land, the world, the universe, and, most important, the higher awareness of humanity.
Before this battle is over, the world will know that few stood against many.
It's not about living happily ever after, but understanding that the culmination of the love story once upon an eternity is the beginning of a responsibility to unleash all the light hidden in the darkness and hopefully bring liberation, comfort to all the beings that are under the spell of suffering and attachment to counterfeit masters. On a side note, both the Nag Hammadi libraries, Eugnostos the Blessed, and the Sophia of Jesus Christ refer to Sophia as not only the mother of the universe, but simply call her love. Is wisdom perhaps the way to make knowledge an affair of the heart, perhaps? Also, did you know that in Coptic, the language of the Nag Hammadi library, the love word and truth are one and the same? It really makes perfect sense when you think about it. Both should free you. Both should be painful and worthy of fear, but both are a release when you extend your arms and fall over the precipices of false realities. Allow yourself to melt against the rising sun and the spring-morn wind. Cast away your life and livelihood for a greater cause, or those in need in the fields of life's battles. Let go, detach, internally die for someone. Become transparent to the transcendental, and love and truth, Sophia and Christ, will heal the fractured consciousness that all humans have, and also throw celestial gasoline on the divine spark that lies dormant within you.
Every passing minute is another chance to turn it all around.
Do you see what I'm really saying? To the Gnostic, love is part of Gnosis, for it is an ingredient of compassion and true seeing. It is truth as well as wisdom. It is going to bat for those who walk in darkness. It is the sense of unification, that brief state where there is no distinction, no separation, and no boundaries. The Valentinians called it the bridal chamber, their highest sacrament or Christian chakra, where all those loose ends are tied together, and you are fully absorbed by the supernova that is spiritual love, if you can even call it that. But enough of my drivel. We'll discuss how the Gnostics viewed love and marriage and stuff after our interview. I'd like to thank Sparky from the Palm Tree Garden and Aeon Byte's contributing writer Jim West for giving me a hand with such a difficult topic. I stand back for a while and let Richard Smoley discuss the mystery of love from his sidewinder, soul-challenging book, Conscious Love. This is the Aeon Byte interview, and with us today, we definitely have the pleasure of having back Richard Smoley to talk about his new book, Conscious Love. How are you today, Richard?
I'm great. It's really great to be here, Miguel. Thanks very much for having me on.
The pleasure is all mine. It seems that, as we talked on the email before, that such concepts as Gnosis, Enlightenment, and salvation are really a lot easier to define than the term love, although human society spends more energy on that concept than probably anything else in their personal pursuits. Why did you decide to write a book on such a loaded word, and why did you call it Conscious Love?
Well, I was always dissatisfied with a lot of the treatments of love, partly for a reason that you've already alluded to, which is the concept ends up seeming very, very vague and meaningless. It's also apparently very hard to discuss love without becoming very sentimentalized about it. And people get poetic, and unless you're a really good poet, getting poetic is not generally a good way to go. So partly because of this vagueness and fuzzy sentimentality about it, and it also seems to me, as one of the chief themes of the book, I think, indicates that people are very conflicted and confused about love. And these are reasons that we can get into during the course of the interview. But a lot of times, for example, people imagine love is or ought to be unconditional when it's nothing of the kind. Most forms of love, most of the time, are highly hedged around with conditions, whether or not we want to admit that to ourselves. So I wrote that book partly to explore that fact, and the title Conscious Love comes from the fact that, well, we really do need to be more conscious about love and conscious of what we're doing when we love, but moreover, there is a type of love that can recognize this and perhaps go beyond these transactions to something that is a little more unconditional.
And what do you mean that by conditional? I know a lot of times in your book you talk about debts. Debts have to be paid and so forth.
Well, let's put it this way. Let's take a very simple, obvious case. There's this woman, say, whose husband gets drunk every night and beats her up and kicks her down the stairs. And her friends are all sort of wondering, well, why doesn't she just leave him? And her point of view is like, well, I love him unconditionally. Moreover, I married him and I promised to stay with him for better or for worse. Somehow, and this happens all the time, there are homes for women like that, and there are probably not enough of them. But something seems wrong in that, at least to the contemporary American sensibility. And I'm not saying it shouldn't seem wrong, but the fact is that if you're not getting something out of a relationship, particularly a love relationship, it's not really healthy to pursue it. So however much you can insist that your love is unconditional, somehow we expect it to be normal that love should be conditional. Some of Dostoevsky's novels, you come across, these abused wives who put up with everything for the sake of their husband. In Crime and Punishment, there's the character Sonia who becomes a prostitute to support her family after her alcoholic father gets crushed by a carriage. Dostoevsky means these in a certain sort of way to express the ultimate, paradoxical way of Christian love, but to a non-Russian reader, this just seems often fantastic. So there is this idea that love ought to involve some kind of transaction. That is to say, you behave a certain way to me if I behave to you in a certain way. And that involves debts. And we're actually at a very good season to be talking about this because there's no better example of what I'm talking about than Christmas gift giving. You'll see, if you're like me, every year you get a gift from someone you didn't expect to get a gift from. And however pleased you may be by this gift, you'll almost instantly react with, oh my God, I didn't get them anything. So it's pretty clear that in Christmas gift giving, there's an interchange involved. In fact, you say exchange gifts. This is part of the transactionality of love and that form between friends or acquaintances. I've already spoken about love in a kind of romantic or marital context. And the problem is not so much that these things are transactional, but we kind of forget that they're transactional, or we get brought up short when we're reminded that they're transactional. The issue of debts relates to the theme of esoteric Christianity, because if you go through the Gospels, you'll see a fair amount about forgiving debts. In the Lord's Prayer, it says, forgive us our debts as we forgive, or literally, forgive us our debts as we have forgiven our debtors. That is a literal translation of the Greek of that line. It's not trespasses, it is debts. You can imagine that making this statement to convention of bankers or something like that, they might not be too agreeable to it. But there is this kind of interaction, this kind of transaction, whether it's a matter of gifts, love, money, whatever, and humans use that, we live by that. But if that's the only form of love we know, then it becomes stifling and limiting. And I think part of the theme of conscious love is that, we need to be aware of that.
Richard, could you give us your definition of what love is, as well as some others you have found pithy enough to be useful?
Yeah, well, of course, there are an almost infinite number of them. One that I quote in the book is by Charles Bukowski, which is, love is the common sense to care very much for something very good. And I really like that.
I love that one, too. That was brilliant.
Yeah, that has kind of Bukowski's genius about it, something kind of really, no nonsense, matter of fact, street level. But a somewhat more philosophical definition of love, the one I'm kind of working with in the book, is that which unites self and other. If you look at it in some way or another, love does that, and it can take the form of even a very common, at the very lowest levels of mere commonality of interest, the form of, some kind of very, very low-level friendship, the highest, levels of, sort of transcendent altruism, or the sort of love that's praised in great literature where, the two become one and that kind of thing. But another aspect of it is, of course, that if you say something unites self and other, you have to have a self and other. Love is always directed toward another. Even when you say you love yourself, and people do, and it's a meaningful term and a meaningful way of speaking, you're still, in a sense, what you're really going to is one part of yourself loving another part, whatever those parts may be. So there's always self and other. There's also something that brings the two together and unites them so that they're not totally isolated, but they're not so united that they sort of melt into each other. And I think this, with a lot of different facets and a lot of different explanations, goes far toward giving a reasonably pithy and reasonably accurate view of love in many, most, or all of its forms.
And moving on to the topic of religion, The conventional wisdom says that Christianity seems to be more concerned with love than any of the other major religions and some of the minor ones. Is that really an accurate statement, Richard?
I think so. I think it's Christianity that brought love to kind of the center of human consciousness. Christianity didn't invent love. You can find examples of pretty much any of the types of love that we know today in literature that precedes Christianity. But no one before Christ sort of said that love is the most important thing. Although it's the case that in the two greatest commandments, love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul, and love thy neighbor as thyself, are direct quotations from the Mosaic Law. They're only kind of two kind of the word commandments in the Mosaic Law, whereas Christ sort of picks them out and makes them, the center point of his religion. And I think this is very significant. It means that today, when you hear, love is the answer, or all you need is love, these are echoes of Christianity, even if the people who wrote those songs or whatever they were thinking when they were going through it had nothing like Christianity in mind. This doesn't mean Christianity is right, but it does mean that the extent to which we venerate love, unconsciously or consciously, we remain Christians, and ours is a Christian civilization. So I think it is kind of a contribution of Christianity to put love at that, center point. The idea, and I think there's a profound truth in it, in that go back to the idea of love uniting self and other. There's always going to be self and other. That is to say, there's multiplicity. There's lots of different things there. But they also have to have something in common, something that unites them, or they're, in a sense, going to be flying out into space. And that's why, you'll see in like Dante or other great figures like that, love is sort of the force that rules the universe.
But on the other hand, you also mentioned that, for example, in the letters of St. Paul and, like in Corinthians, we've all heard it at weddings, the words of St. Paul, and he talks about how the most important thing, or at least the KJV translates the most important thing besides prophecy and all that, is love. But isn't the right translation actually charity? And what does he mean by charity?
Well, he means by charity, the word is the Greek agape, and the Latin translation renders that as caritas, which ends up as our charity. It is a different type of love. It moves more toward conscious and genuine unconditional love, rather than the highly emotionally, highly involved types of love. Most of the time, in most kind of Christian theological accounts of agape is sort of held up as being superior to all the other forms. I'm not necessarily sure that it's the case. Agape as a word in the Greek language has a bit of a chilly connotation. The Greek lexicon, says it often implies regard rather than affection. So it's not, this kind of really huggy, slobbery type of feeling that we're accustomed to. It's impersonal in the sense that it's to be directed at everyone equally. It's impartial, and it's conscious in the sense that to the extent that it thinks about the good of another, it genuinely tries to think of the good of another and to try to do the good of another rather than what you maybe imagine that good might be, or whether you might like the same thing in the same circumstances yourself. Where everybody's familiar with the golden rule, but I like George Bernard Shaw's version better, which is, do not do unto others as you would they would do unto you. Their taste may not be the same.
Yeah, I did laugh out loud when I read that because it's true.
Well, and it's the case. People will, if let's say you like to listen to your stereo loud late at night, in an urban setting, this happens often enough. you're listening to stereo at 2 a.m. and, your neighbors hate it. Well, you think, well, I don't know, if someone was playing the stereo that loud, that wouldn't bother me. You may even be applying the golden rule, but it may be totally inappropriate because it drives your neighbors nuts. And so it's in a way a more sophisticated application, and it is conscious in the sense that it has some kind of greater sense of what the other person is like, rather than just kind of some vague assumption, or some kind of implied transactionality. That's where the whole return good for evil aspect of Christianity comes about. So I think it's profound. It's one of the, shall we say, it is one of the higher forms of love. But to say that it is or should be the only form of love is maybe going a bit too far, because we are bound to each other by our transactions, our debts, our obligations. Whether it's our obligation to be faithful to your spouse, or to feed your kids, or anything like that, as anything else. So I guess what I'm trying to do in this book is to paint as wide a picture of love, and to do it in a comprehensive way, so that it's neither sentimentalized nor extolling one type of love in some sort of unrealistic way over all the others.
And Richard, what are some of the other different types of love we find in the Bible that are pertinent to our modern lives?
Well, the standard view, which is popularized by C.S. Lewis in his book Four Loves, is that, as is obvious, there are four types of love. Agape, which we've already talked about, is one. Eros, which is familiar as an erotic, is another, and that in the Greek language, kind of runs the range from highly romantic love to plain old lust. There's one called storge, which is family love, which has almost kind of a context of putting up with, which is often what one has to do with your family.
Yeah, especially at this time of the year.
Yeah, exactly. And philia, which is friendship, the general, and more or less what we maintain by that. Now, when I started writing the book, I was kind of vaguely minded to kind of work within that framework, but then it occurred to me that there were lots of other types of love, or at least some other types of love that didn't exactly fit into that. One, for example, is what do you do with your, say, altruistic feelings toward humanity? That's a type of love as well, but it's a bit more abstract. There are others that, can put in around that. I thought it was marriage and romantic love are in some ways different enough that I thought I would treat them in separate chapters and so on.
You write a chapter entitled Kierkegaard's Mistake. Why did you put this rather tragic love life and decide it was important in understanding conscious love?
Well, the story is that the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard had a romantic involvement with a woman named Regina Olsen. She was, I think, in her late teens, and he was, I think, in his mid to late 20s. And he fell in love with her and kind of gave her to imply that he would marry her. And in the end, he broke off the relationship. Now, he didn't dump her for anybody else because he was never involved with anyone else again. And he still loved her to the point where he left all his estate to her when he died, decades later. You get the impression just from reading the letters and the stories, firsthand accounts of this interchange, that he kind of gave it up because it was somehow better to deny oneself of love. It was sort of enabling that kind of self-sacrifice was somehow better than the indulgence of love, even if it would have made her happy as well. And I think there's this curious desire, and it I think comes from kind of a mutant understanding of Christianity, that somehow a love that involves self-sacrifice is better than a love that doesn't. Yeah, I think that's led people to inflict a lot of countless kind of miseries upon themselves as a result of it. I mean, Kierkegaard was a strange figure, and as I sometimes say about him, he never met a paradox he didn't like. But he does, heighten this kind of sense of, the sense of self-denial for its own sake. It's almost like an absolute good, which, doesn't seem to be very wise to me.
And am I getting wrong, but didn't Kierkegaard also feel that maybe, and I guess this is also a problem with Christianity, that somehow sex, which was viewed as something sometimes wrong, even in marriage, will dilute that spiritual love between two people? I mean, even Paul talks about, the famous celibate wandering couples who, walk around. So does this have to do with it?
Yeah, and this kind of problematic attitude towards sex is it is a curious feature of Christianity. I mean, other religions such as Hinduism and Buddhism have their celibates and their ascetics and so on, but it does seem to be a rather curious feature of Christianity, and the reasons for it to me are not totally clear, or rather there are several reasons. One, Christianity grew up in the late Roman Empire when sensuality had become a matter of excess, as you can read from the literature of the period and the accounts of the Roman empires and so on. So Christianity was kind of an abreaction to that, and there's that as perhaps it was also kind of a means of separating itself from the Jewish tradition, which has never particularly extolled celibacy. There are no Jewish monks. And it also, I think, attests to something that was just in the air at the time, because you do see that ascetic impulse, in a lot of the Greek philosophers. Plato, for example, hence the phrase platonic love. So, and I think Christianity started to absorb all of that, and it I think made the mistake of demonizing sexuality. Now, how did this demonization come about? Well, let's say, to put on very, very pedestrian terms, you've decided, for whatever reason, that it's evil to go to the bathroom. Well, there's a point at which you're going to have to go to the bathroom, and you're going to get obsessed with going to the bathroom. And this happens even if you haven't decided. Even if you're like 20 minutes from the next rest stop or something like that, you can see this. So you become kind of obsessed with it because you really need this. Similarly, people who are starving, dream or fantasize about food. So these people who deprive themselves of sex without necessarily having the right or knowledge to channel the energy became obsessed with it. Their sexual fantasies turned into devils for them. They became obsessions. This was an odd, feature of that period, and why exactly it was so pervasive is a little hard to understand. But I think particularly over the last 100 years, people are coming to the realization that, sex is a need that's, among many other types of need, and it's not a good idea either to, try to choke it off entirely or to become obsessed with it or to do it compulsively.
And in the case of Dante, does this have anything to do with love, his infatuation with Beatrice, or do you see this just simply as he found his muse?
Well, the story of, Dante's love for, Beatrice or Beatrice is curious. I mean, it's told in a rather short autobiographical work called La Vita Nuova, which you can certainly get easily enough. And he basically saw her kind of from a distance, and he fell in love with her when she was 9. They didn't really see her very often. After that, I think she died, probably when she was no older than 20. I forget her exact age. And Dante kind of idealized her into a muse, as you say. She becomes his guide to the realms of heaven, as Virgil had been Dante's guides to hell and purgatory. Reading it is a little curious because it's not unrequited love in the way that we normally think of it, in that unrequited love is, that as well, I'd really like to, have sex with this woman or marry her and live with her forever. And it's almost beside the point. And loving her from a distance seems to be what it's all about. Dante had a wife and children, and we never really hear about her. His wife, whose name was Gemma, what she thought of all this stuff written Beatrix, I don't think anybody perhaps knows. But it points up another thing, and it is worth noting that there's a certain type of sexual sublimation, and it's almost like an energy transfer. Whereas if you, shall we say, do not express love in a sexual way, or your desire in a sexual way, it can, under certain circumstances, move up to the area of the heart and produce ecstasies that are maybe no less satisfying than the good old-fashioned orgasm. And I think a lot of what the troubadours, Dante, and other people who are kind of cultivating this kind of chaste love, which was very, very much the thing in the high Middle Ages, were trying to do. It seems to be related to Tantra in some sort of way, but I'm reluctant to say that because I'm not quite sure that a lot of what we know as Tantra over here has anything really to do with Tantra as such. But there does seem to be this sexual sublimation that is supposed to, possibly even does, manifest as some kind of emotional ecstasy. And that may have been partly what Dante was about.
Yeah, and this ties into the concept of courtly love. What I mean, obviously, it's obvious that we have been very influenced by courtly love, but could you explain what is courtly love and how it got started?
It's very much tied in with some of the ideas I was just talking about. It's called that because it developed out of what were literally courts of love. And these were groups, they were almost, I don't think they had any legal authority, but they sort of fancifully acted as if they did. They would be run by a certain noblewoman. Eleanor of Aquitaine was the most famous of them. And they would actually have rulings and pronouncements about love. And one very striking one says, we pronounce, as a matter of fact, that love cannot exist between husband and wife. Well, this is weird, but it ties into a lot of the ideas I'm exploring in the book. Because if love is totally unconditional, or should be totally unconditional, well, a husband and wife, the love is quite conditional. It's quite contractual. I mean, it's a legal contract. Marriage is a legal contract. And their claim, which may have not been entirely serious, but I don't think it was entirely in jest either, was that, that contractuality, that very sense of obligation, limited the freedom that's essential to true love. And as this concept evolved, tended to be expressed in men who would fall in love or with a woman who was for some reason unavailable. It goes back to what that ruling was. It almost had to be for someone who was already married, and it had to be for someone from a distance. And the idea was probably ideally that, no sexual intercourse would ever take place between them, in a sense, so that sense of ecstasy would arise. Now, a lot of these figures of courtly love actually did have wives and children of their own, so it wasn't really about sexual abstinence. It was more this love for a remote ideal, and people have all sorts of theories about it, that it was connected with the Cathars, who were as you know, a Gnostic sect who thrived in the same area in Provence in the 11th and 12th and 13th centuries. No one's ever really connected the two very effectively, but there seemed to be kind of a milieu that was favorable to that. So that's kind of where courtly love is, and that whole notion of love as a self-sacrificing thing for a kind of a distant ideal is kind of a legacy of that tradition. And there was a French author named Denis de Rougemont who wrote a fairly influential book called Love in the Western World, who said that all romantic love, is essentially invented by the troubadours in this courtly love tradition. I don't find that plausible, because you can go back to classical literature and find people falling in love, in ways that sound very much like the way people fall in love nowadays. But it is probably true that idea of love being all you need in a romantic sense probably became popularized by the troubadours, and so, in a sense, that pretty much every love song on the radio today is sort of a descendant of the troubadour tradition.
And Richard, around that area or past that area, who was Swedenborg, and why do you find his ideas on love important? I know you mentioned him a few times.
Yeah, Swedenborg was an 18th century Swedish visionary. He started out, I don't think he was ever really conventional type, but a large part of his early career was as a mining engineer. And at a certain point in his midlife, he started to have very elaborate visions of the heavens and hells. And these were very much his own experience and his own descriptions. They certainly resemble traditional Christian heavens and hells, but there's certainly also a lot of differences. And Swedenborg was different from a lot of Christians in that he said that the highest form of chastity was in fact marriage, and marriage to the right partner, that is to say someone who is suitable for you. And he called this, amor conjugialis, or, sometimes translated conjugial love. So conjugial is a word that doesn't even really appear other than as a translation of this term of Swedenborg's. It was kind of interesting because he felt quite contrary to something Jesus says in the gospel, that there is marriage in the kingdom of heaven, and moreover that if a couple dies, they'll kind of figure out whether they're going to remain married in the afterlife. If there's like a really deep affinity between them, their marriage will continue in these other realms. If not, they'll separate, they'll go their own ways. He himself seemed to think that his future wife would be this countess who was married to a friend of his. I don't think there's any evidence that he had an affair with her, but he obviously thought that something like that was going on. So it's an interesting view, and it's a bit of a departure from a lot of the traditional Christian views of love, in which sex is sort of in and of itself impure. Swedenborg himself said, he seemed to think, having an affair, something like that, for a man who wasn't in a position to get married, to find the right person was perfectly all right. And there seems to be some evidence that he had affairs himself, although his followers find this extremely uncomfortable to think about.
Richard Dawkins, in his Selfish Gene book, seems to slam shut the concept of altruistic love and bring it down just to a biological effect, and then talks about memes. Yet you say his work plays right into the hands of esoteric love. Could you explain why this is the case?
I don't think, Dawkins' view in the Selfish Gene is totally in accord with what I'm saying. But I think in terms of biological love, it explains a fair amount, the desire for the gene to perpetuate itself. I think, he goes a bit far in saying that all altruism can be ascribed to this, and the sociobiologists in their heyday in the 1970s would, say, well, your likelihood of being altruistic on behalf of another member of your species was directly correlated to the number of genes that you would share with them, so that you would be, twice as likely to, try to save your child or a brother as you would a nephew or grandchild or something like that. It's like all of those materialistic theories. It's kind of crude and simplistic, but I think we do have to say that the love that has to do with reproduction and sexuality does have to do with reproduction is to a large extent, the genes wanting to perpetuate themselves. The fact that the love that a mother feels for her child looks unconditional. And many parents will say, my love for my child is unconditional. And they may genuinely feel that. But they're, I would say, completely wrong, because your love is very conditional. It's conditional on that person being your child. I quote a a Dutch writer on Tantrism, who says, well, your love for your child is very personal. Well, the makeup of the genes could have been quite different. Kind of another baby could have come out, and the mother would love the baby in the same supposedly personal way. So it is very much a reproductive strategy, so to speak. Some people theorize that the whole mechanism of falling in love, as we know it, is geared toward this. Some scientists will say that people fall in love, falling in love and being in love in that kind of heady way is going to last a maximum of 4 years, which sometimes even seems like a rather generous estimate. But the idea is that, well, if you think about it, that's probably long enough, just about long enough to, conceive a child, have a child, and sort of stay around until the child can at least walk around and, fend for itself a little bit. And there are, sociobiologists who say this is very much the case. So a lot of what we think of as our, kind of most human emotions are maybe in the service of, these so-called selfish genes.
Yeah, one quote I really like about your book is you mentioned that romantic love transcends the self, family love attempts to perpetuate the self, and friendship relaxes the self. I think we don't want to overlook our friends, do we, and the love we have for them.
No, and I think friendship is. A lot of times it often ends up being, at its best, kind of the purest form of love, because it is genuinely, it's the form of love that's most likely to be free of agendas. If your girlfriend doesn't call you up for like 3 weeks, you're going to be hurt. But if a friend of yours doesn't call for 3 weeks, oh yeah, I know he's really busy this time. It's all kind of all right. I think friendship at its best, and friendship has its conditions and contractual elements. Very, very often, I think everybody's done this. You have someone say, I always call so and so. I'm always the one who does the inviting. He's never the one who calls me. And there's a point at which you kind of feel. You're getting the signal that, it's not entirely reciprocal, so you tend to let the thing go. Some people take this to the extreme of, getting angry and perpetuating a break or something like that. But a lot of times, I'm really fond of someone, somebody just really doesn't seem that interested, so, the hell with it. But, when friendship, works well, there's this sense of a connection that is fairly free of agendas, and it's fairly free of the enmeshments that we feel with our, a love relationship or with our children or parents, that kind of thing. And it may explain why that you may have had friends. I've certainly had friends like this. You may have lost touch for 10 years, and you feel like when you get back in touch, you can kind of pick right up again.
Right.
So I think friendship is it's a very powerful, very satisfying form of love, and it goes without saying. Some people are better friends than they are parents. Some people are better parents than they are friends. They're kind of different sets of skills, that all of these things. But I think the whole idea is to at least have some contact with a broad range of different types of human relationships, and to kind of live all of them with a certain amount of integrity.
And you also write, Richard, that, and I'm sure this must tie into love some way, but that forgiveness is one of the ways to break the wheel of karma. What do you mean by this?
The law of karma, as it's generally understood, is ironclad. That is, if you did something bad is going to happen to you. And this is the way it's conventionally understood. So if you do something bad, the sword is kind of hanging over your head. I think one of the elements of genius in Christianity is, in the first place, to recognize that forgiveness is a means of turning the law of karma on its own head. That is to say, well, not this sword hanging over you. Well, but on the other hand, if you could use the law of karma to, as it were, turn upon itself. Well, if you forgive, you're entitled to forgiveness. Again, that's the Lord's Prayer, forgive us our debts as we have forgiven our debtors. I would say that prayer, that line is not only sins in the sense that one normally thinks, but all sorts of little obligations, there are times when you never bothered to return someone's phone call, and you probably feel bad about that. Well, the way out of it, even just for your own peace of mind, is to, forgive someone else for not returning your phone call. It at least kind of loosens some of this a lot of love in the transactional sense can get very fiercely actuarial. And one of Gurdjieff's pupils, Morris Nicole, even characterized it as keeping inner accounts. I don't think I have to explain too much about what that is, because we all do this, they owe me dinner, he owes me a favor, that kind of thing. It's not only in the world of the mafia that this sort of thing happens. But, forgiveness is in a sense, a way out of this, and it's a way of kind of, breaking loose some of this kind of log jam of obligation.
Richard, you also write how the Gnostic worldview helps us overcome the archons, whatever they are, forces that keep us from experiencing love. Could you also explain a little bit about this?
The Gnostic view, I think, can be explained in many ways, but you could say the archons, the rulers, are, in a sense, our own structures of consciousness. To take one, just the desire to attack and defend. This is part of our own structure of consciousness. I mean, this is built very deeply into our minds. There's this whole element of this kind of defensiveness, this attack, this kind of sense of ego, which I would say in the Gnostic myth is symbolized by the demiurge. That sort of imagines itself as kind of alone and isolated in a hostile universe. And you could say that, going past this, through the insight of realizing that these structures of consciousness are only relative, and that there is a level of mind, the level of being, that essentially all kind of essentially share, that will also help us go past this. And I think if you don't understand this, love in any kind of unconditional sense is not really possible, because you'll always be limited by your agendas and your interests. But I would say that the insight of a Gnostic ultimately is that there's something in us that says I, and it goes way past the personal ego, which is symbolized by the demiurge, and there's a sense that that which says I in us is that which says I in every other being as well. And I would think if you understand this insight, a lot of even some of the more obscure mystical literature of the world becomes quite clear. But if you have an intuitive, shall we say, Gnostic insight of this truth, that is to say, a realization of it, in the sense of kind of almost having a light bulb go off in your head, then again, your agendas, your interests, your kind of little jockeyings for position, may not entirely end, but they start to lose their grip. And I think this is, probably the key thing that one kind of is pointed toward, kind of the deeper understandings of the Christian tradition.
And to end, Richard, which you do in your last chapter, what exactly do you mean by transcending the heart?
Well, that's another aspect of perhaps the over-sentimentalized version of love. And you'll see over and over again in, the typical darky Hollywood romance, for example, that the heart is wiser than the head. And I think I would like to say that I don't necessarily believe this to be the case. There's something, that's become called emotional intelligence over recent years. And it is a genuine thing. There is such a thing as emotional intelligence. The only thing is that I would say it has to be integrated with cerebral intelligence rather than replacing it. I mean, there's a curious split in the Western mind these days, particularly among, so-called enlightened people, kind of this denigration of the head instead of the heart. The head is always wrong, or the head is the cause of all of our problems today. And I'm not sure I would buy that. I would say that, the head that's detached from the heart, so to speak, that there's no connection with its own emotional life is and does cause problems. But I think the real solution, rather than to turn to this kind of idolizing of the heart in some sort of way, is to find that which in ourselves integrates both the head and the heart. E.M. Forster in his novel Howard's End said only connect, and I think this is what he was really looking for. And I would go back to the sense of that which says I in us in this very deep sense. In some of my other books I call, the true I, that which in you that can look at both the operations of your head and heart and, to some degree simultaneously and integrate them so that you're not, so to speak, only hobbling on one leg. And I think that's important. I think it's a way of having a more mature and realistic idea of love than is often propounded in kind of pop circles.
Well, I think that's all the time we have today, Richard. Definitely like to thank you for coming on and discussing your book, great book, Conscious Love.
Well, thank you very much, Miguel. A really great set of questions, and you really, I felt understood and appreciated the book quite a bit, which I'm very grateful for. So I hope your listeners enjoy it.
Oh yes, it's a great book that covers too much ground, and but we just didn't have enough time. But you definitely leave no stone unturned. But again, thank you, and good luck with the book.
Okay, well, thanks a lot.
And there you have it, my beloved truth seekers. Richard Smoley on the mystery of love, based on his new book, Conscious Love. A lot more insights in that book than we could have covered in our limited time at Aeon Byte. But I guarantee you'll find yourself reflecting on the L word more than you have in a long time. And that's a good thing. Have I ever mentioned how important self-knowledge is? Maybe once or twice, I don't know. But until and after you pass another gate guarded by an Archon, my advice is love so hard in your life, you make a complete fool of yourself. Someone once said, let them laugh at you for being different, while you laugh at them for being the same.
Summer romances end for all kinds of reasons. But when all is said and done, they have one thing in common. They are shooting stars, a spectacular moment of light in the heavens, a fleeting glimpse of eternity, and in a flash, they're gone.
As babbled before, I said I would deal with the Gnostic view of love and marriage. As far as the daily realities of matters of the heart, it really depended on the Gnostic sect or lodge. Every Gnostic has a different path, a different lifestyle to pursue Gnosis. Some Gnostics turn their backs on marriage, family, and probably friends, nurturing their divine spark through the contemplative life and still practicing the mysteries. Knowledge of their selves and uniting their inner opposites was their Harlequin novel.
I am so alone.
Like the Manichaeans and Cathars, they also didn't want to bring any more slaves to Jehovah into the flawed universe. Others, like the Carpocratians of Alexandria, if we believe some of the church fathers, were party animals that made college fraternities seem like that goldfish funeral for your 5-year-old daughter.
Sex without love is an empty experience.
Yes, but as empty experiences go, it's one of the best.
In the middle, the Valentinians saw value in love and marriage, seeing how the connection of a man and a woman could be a reflection of the higher affair of Christ and Sophia, or the other aeons above that were always gathered in pairs. Kinda like Christianity's answer to the East Tantric sex. I suspect the Valentinians believed that when a man and a woman make love and lay in bliss in each other's arms, two being one, that is an image of the Pleroma. Irenaeus himself wrote that the Valentinians believed that, quote, any man who has never loved a woman so as to possess her is not of the truth.
Sometimes there's so much beauty in the world. I feel like I can't take it.
In the Sethian inscription of the Nag Hammadi library's Origin of the World, it is a concert of the demiurge that creates eros, lust or romance, through her menstrual flow. Not a great visual, but adding to all the Valentinian liturgy, it's safe to say that casual, empty, and self-serving sex or relationships were frowned upon.
Don't turn this into one of your big moral issues.
Again, the Carpocratians, both Clement of Alexandria and Epiphanius railed about, might be the exception. But we only know their words, and no extant literature remains from them. Even so, the Carpocratians believed that the only escape from the Ouroboros, the serpent that encircled time and space, was to experience every experience known, and every experience possible, until the divine spark finally got so weary it literally made a 50-yard dash to the Pleroma.
There must be some kind of way out of here.
So as always, the Gnostics were varied, except that brotherly and sisterly love is almost always mentioned. So is the love between teacher and a pupil, and so is the love of the Pleroma and the apostles of light it sends down to teach us how to finally sober up.
We all come into this world with our little egos equipped with individual horns. If we don't blow them, who else will?
But words fail me in the end, as always, and especially when I've spoken of love or tried to express it. Love has never failed, but I certainly have failed love. Love is truth. Love is Sophia, and Gnosis is the knowledge of the heart, as Valentinus said. What else can I say? Me, who are no better or wiser than you. What I can do is quote the end of Richard Smoley's Conscious Love as one last stab at perhaps slightly piercing the enchanted membrane of the mystery of love. Like God himself, consciousness loves the world that it has made, and it becomes attached to what it experiences. It clings to the particularity of each combination, struggling to hold it together, and in so doing making enemies of all the other forms that seem to challenge it. Out of this attachment arises all the sorrow of existence, because the nature of the universe is freedom, and no form lasts or wishes to last forever. Thus comes not only dissolution, but grief out of this dissolution. And thus love, as has long been known, is the root of all the joy in the universe, and also of all its pain. I am Abraxas, broadcasting at the virtual Alexandria through the GodAboveGod.com. The road is ended, the song is over. Thought I'd have something more to say. But don't cultivate any troubles, my beloved truth seekers, because like heaven above you, the spy that loved you, I'm keeping all of your secrets safe with me tonight. Hello and goodbye as always.
Every time I think of you, I get a shot right through into